Hey, all right. This is Holzfeuer from ArnoCorps, the greatest band of all time. I just want to say to Chris and Rob, congratulations. Whoa, we're talking triple digits. This is important, right? Remember the first time that you curled 100 pounds? Or how about that time you ate your 100th strudel in the pastry eating competition? Unbelievable! But all those accomplishments, they mean nothing compared to episode 100 of the most fantastic exploratory podcast of all time. Why does this exist? All right. Congratulations, Chris and Rob, both of you. Taking names and kicking ass. Keep it up. Go!
Do not adjust your digital device. What you are about to see and hear may shock and appall you. Join our hosts as they encounter countless thrills, spills, chills, and hilarity as they explore the very weirdest in pop culture. The following media is so strange, so beyond the scope of what is normal, it will make you ask the question, why does this exist?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Why Does This Exist? I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob.
And today, we are live and in color, baby. We are here for our 100th anniversary year episode.
Botch!
I've botched it all. We've got the worst intro in the world. Everybody just tuned out. All three of you just tuned out completely. We are now talking live in front of no studio audience.
Yes.
Because everyone has left the premises in disgust.
But it is a special episode because, as you said, it is our 100th episode. Botch! Wow, this is Botchamania. Welcome to our live rehearsal here.
Botchamania running wild, everybody.
But it's also the first episode we're ever doing live where we're in the same place. We're in the same studio right now, and it is a studio. Don't worry about it.
Yes, we are where the magic happens.
Yes. Anyway, so for this very special episode, our first live episode and our 100th episode, we're doing, of course, Thrash Metal, which has been a part of both our lives for like a million years now.
It seems as long as we can remember. And now that we're in our 30s, it's at least half of our lives.
Yes.
Eventually, it will be most of our lives.
Well,
then it will be all of our lives. Yeah. Then we will die.
And then, like sand in the hourglass, these are the days of our lives.
So much living. I was actually talking to my friend about this the other day, and I talked about it to you, too. Not to say that you're not my friend in that context, which now makes it seem like I just use you for this. So maybe I do. I don't know. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
So I was talking about this, and it was like, you know, how, and we'll get into this when we talk about like how like we played in like various thrash metal bands and everything, how just reflecting now in our 30s and just seeing like just all the crazy stuff that we used to do, putting together barbecue shows and just like, you know, helping a lot of local thrash bands from like around the country tour, even around the world, to be honest, just setting them up with a place to play or a place to stay. It just feels like, it doesn't feel like I did this. It feels like I'm looking into a past life. It feels like I'm reading about something that I used to do, like that another version of me did.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much very surreal, and I don't know if that's how aging works or getting older works, but it's just really interesting because you do all these interesting things, and you're like, you know, it would be great if I did that, and then you realize I did do that, but you're also like, did I?
Yeah.
Because it seems so distant.
Yeah.
But thrash metal holds a very special place in our hearts, if you couldn't tell. It's our favorite music genre to listen to jam to, and to just play in general. It's probably the purest form of metal
that's often
that you
what it's
could
been
find.
Described as,
Just this weird crossing of punk and hardcore, just hard rock music, and just hardcore punk just converging and just it's this beautiful cacophony of noise and madness and just a party atmosphere, social commentary, and all those things rolled up into one, and even just like crazy movies and stuff.
Yeah,
that it's just it's pretty much just people hanging out and just like riffing it. It's almost the music equivalent of just having a conversation with a good buddy about anything.
Yeah. Yeah. But before we start, we should probably get into our normal spiel.
I mean, I don't know what else to say. You can, we are Why Does This Exist? We are a podcast that speaks about the very weirdest in pop culture for 100 episodes and counting.
100.
100, ladies and germs and vermin of all ages. You can find us and support us for in a number of ways. The best way is to head on over to patreon.com/whydoesthisexist. You can give us as little as $1 or as much as you want. And but what that means is you will get exclusive access to the Discord server where you'll be basically a consigliere to our shenanigans. And you'll take a look at whatever new episodes we've got going on. You can stick around and chat with us. You can have some weird, crazy conversations amongst yourselves. Pitch some articles for our man Tony to write. Those are also on the Patreon. Ow! Those are also on the Patreon. I bit my tongue. I was so excited.
Oh, God.
Yep, now there's going to be
blood spraying everywhere.
Blood everywhere. Just beautiful blood everywhere. All over where the magic happens. At an undisclosed location. But when you do all that, you get access to the Discord server, and if we think you're cool enough, we might even let you be on an episode. But the minute that you give us money for Patreon, well, thank you. We won't thank you in the episode. No, we will roast you in the episode. Well, which means that we'll just say something disparaging about you instead of thanking you like all these other schmucks do. Because, let's be honest, the people that you're giving your dollars to on Patreon, they don't care about you. They just want your money. So we're going to be brutally honest. For example, our good friend Phil gave us $1. Well, guess what, Phil? Go fuck yourself. That's all I have to say about that. Thanks for the money, schmuck. Now that we've got your money, if you never want to give us any more again, guess what? We got it once, and we're going to use it on whatever it is that we want. Like moist towelettes.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can support us in a few other ways, too. You can get us on social media. You can listen to us wherever it is that you get your podcasts and all that other sweet Jesus baby music and all that stuff.
You can find out where we live and egg our house,
Don't do that. But I'll point you in the direction of my neighbors.
All right.
But that's the news. Here's the weather. You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge from a ragtag group of rogues. So let's get on with the goddamn show. What is thrash metal? Explain to these people who don't know what it is. These unindoctrinated and unadvised fools.
Well,
what is it?
If we're going to talk about thrash metal, you got to go way, way back to the start. So of course heavy metal has its origins in like the late 60s with a lot of like blues bands that kind of like had heavy distortion, like most famously Black Sabbath, but also, bands like Led Zeppelin are often credited as like creating like, the heavy metal sound. Then of course, you throughout the 70s, it kind of grew. You had bands like Judas Priest, which was, really didn't become popular in the States until Unleashed in the East came out. And they were like a band for like 10 years before that album came out. So, that was kind of like the beginnings of like this, as what we call the new wave of British heavy metal. And of course, then you had bands like Iron Maiden, Angel Witch, Tigers of Pantang, so many different like of these new wave British heavy metal bands. And essentially, they just took what was already existing in the heavy metal movement, which, of course you have like Black Sabbath, that kind of thing, and sped it up a little bit. And kind of had like dueling guitars. Oftentimes it was, usually two guitar players, rhythm and lead, and they would have dueling guitar solos and that kind of thing. So then this music came over to the United States, and in a little place called California, all these young kids growing up started listening to new wave of British heavy metal.
Well, it wasn't just California, but you got it all over the world.
It was all over the world, but California specifically is where the thrash metal movement was kind of fomented.
Yes, a little bit. Or at least it is most commonly associated.
Yeah.
We'll get to the New York scene in a bit.
Yes. so you had, guys like Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield and Dave Mustaine and the Exodus guys, Gary Holt, Kirk Hammett was originally in Exodus before he joined Metallica.
Yep, the Wee Little Babies and Death Angel at the time.
Yep, they were all listening to this music and just like playing, and then of course they had the influence of the punk movement, which was also big in the 70s in both the United States and Great Britain. So they kind of basically took the new wave of British heavy metal and also the hardcore punk music, which was starting to come out at the same exact time, and combined it and basically invented thrash metal. And if you listen to like all the old interviews with those guys, like back in the 80s, they were kind of like trying to just do something that was different than what was popular in the metal scene at the time, because in the early 80s is really when the glam metal scene was starting to come into its own. You had Motley Crue and bands like that were kind of like becoming popular, and they were like looking at that and they wanted to like, we don't want to do that. We don't want to friggin' dress up with makeup and poofy hair and
well,
like...
also a lot of those guys took their girlfriends because for whatever reason, because they were like the pretty boy
exactly
types, and
it was
a weird time.
I think, was it the Real Hollywood Stories with Charlie Murphy when he was like saying like, back in those days the guys that looked more like a chick would get all the chicks basically.
Yeah.
So but that was true in the metal scene too, and so you had these like underground punks, and I remember there was a scene, I don't know if it was in Get Thrashed or some other documentary, where like Sebastian Bach was talking about it, and he's like, the first time he saw Metallica's Kill 'Em All in the record store, he picked it up and he turned it around and he said, "These are the 4 ugliest people I've ever seen in my life. I have to buy this record." And I think that was like a big part of like the popularity, is that they were going against the grain, and didn't care what they looked like. They wore what they wore on the street on stage. They didn't get dressed up in these stupid costumes and like wear spandex and stuff like that. They wore just leather jackets and jeans and band t-shirts basically. So there was like this punk aspect to it. And in fact, when Metallica was coming up, that was the biggest problem when they were in LA, because Metallica originally formed in LA. I mean, they're known as a San Francisco band, but originally they were from LA. James Hetfield grew up in LA. Lars Ulrich grew up in LA. Well, he was originally from Denmark, but moved to LA when he was in high school to play tennis, actually.
Yep, the prodigy.
Yeah. And so they started off there, and they were having so many problems in LA because, as it was described, they were too metal for the punk bars and too punk for the metal bars, because all the metal bars wanted glam metal bands. And
these were also in times where if you had any original music, it was very unlikely that you'd even get in a bar. So you had to do covers and then become a draw that way, and then eventually you could start squeezing in your original stuff.
Yeah. Obviously
this was also when people actually showed up to things.
Yeah, that's true. And also, bands didn't have to sell tickets to like fill up but we can get into that later.
Yeah, we'll get into that later. This is when promoters were really promoting things.
Yeah. And so a big problem with it too is that like I said, they were too metal for the punk bars and too punk for the metal bars. So they weren't getting a lot of gigs. And again, this is a time where it was before Pro Tools. It was before like anything existed like Logic or anything like that. So if you were in a band, you really had to have some kind of record contract unless you knew someone that had recording equipment. Now, Metallica was lucky because Ron McGovney, their original bass player, just happened to have like a tape recorder and like recording equipment in his garage. So they were able to cut a demo, and they became really big on the tape trading scene.
Yes.
Which was, how these underground bands kind of like spread their music around. You would like record like a shitty demo or an EP on a tape, and then just trade it with other bands, and like they would trade it with other bands, and that's how you kind of spread the music around.
Appreciated the bare bones production value too.
Yeah,
there wasn't like a whole thing where like people expected a certain quality of production. They were like, if this is the best you got, as long as the riffs are decent, then we're in.
Yeah,
like as long as we know that it's basically like they like just finding out that another one was out there was good enough.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like, and I think that really helped kind of like create this camaraderie in the early thrash metal scene. Like, they were like all brothers, you know, and they all talk about that. Like,
and they'd all reach out the minute that they'd get the tape.
Yeah.
You'd like, if you were in a band too, or if you wanted to start another band, or if you just wanted to help these guys, you'd like, usually their contact information was on the back in case it fell into the hands of a label that was interested, or just anybody who wanted to just like help them out with like anything.
Right.
You would, they'd get in touch with them immediately, and like you'd have so many people that started up their own fan clubs and their own zines and everything, or even just like being pen pals with all these bands.
Yeah.
And it was this crazy organic thing where they, like, if they were finally able to tour, they would just write them, hey, come stay here, or, we have something for you, or if the show gets pulled, then you could play here.
Yes.
Or, like, just all this, like, it was like a weird underground network that they were building.
Yeah.
And they had no idea how big it was going to get.
Yeah. And it really, for Metallica specifically, they really came into their own when they decided to move up to San Francisco, because they would be playing LA, they'd be struggling, they'd get like these, tiny shows with like 5 people watching them, and then they would go up to San Francisco and get huge crowds that were going crazy for them. And so they finally made the decision. It's like, why are we living in LA and like trying to like make it in this scene where that doesn't even want us?
Right. And they try to compete in the wrong market.
Right. So they went up to San Francisco, and San Francisco's always kind of been like the place where like more like underground music kind of like flourishes. Obviously, like it was like all the hippie bands in the 60s and the 70s, and the counterculture was all in, like, a lot of it was centered in San Francisco. So I think that kind of helped them.
The Bay Area was also a rough area at the time.
Yes, it was. Well, I mean, it arguably still kind of is.
Arguably still is, but it's not as bad as it was then.
Yeah.
But this was the 80s where, Times Square was the last place you ever wanted to be.
Yeah, especially at night.
Yeah, where now, forget it.
It's Disneyland.
Yeah, I mean, it might as well be. Some days it's a little happier than Disney World, but that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah. So they, when they moved up to San Francisco, they started getting way more success and like really started to blow up, and it like became nationwide. Like they got a record deal, and they were asked to come out to New York to record the first album, and so they they loaded up like basically a U-Haul truck or a trailer and towed used James Hetfield's truck and towed it across the country, and like all like loaded up in the back. Were they even
called Metallica yet at the time?
Yes, they were Metallica.
Okay, because they started as Leather Charm.
Yes. Well, no, that was actually James's first band.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, that was before he met Lars. When Lars and James met up and started like doing stuff, they immediately were gonna call themselves Metallica.
Oh, that's right, because he did it because he put up a classified ad.
Right. Yes.
That's what it was.
In the Recycler, which is a famous like LA newspaper for like underground bands and stuff like that.
But anyway,
so yeah, they went across country, and this was at a time where Dave Mustaine was still in Metallica, of course, and had been coming a long time where Dave's like drinking and drug problems were kind of getting in the way of things, and so they got to New York, they played a couple of shows, and right before they were due to go into the studio, they kicked Dave out of the band. They pretty much unceremoniously fired him. They bought him a bus ticket, sent him back to LA.
Yeah, probably not the best thing to do, and they've said it since then, like looking back on it, that wasn't really the best way to do it, and it really wasn't that cool, but it was, when you're in your early 20s, you tend to think pretty irrationally and do pretty stupid things that you later realize, oh, that was a mistake.
Yeah. But had that not happened, we wouldn't have gotten, probably the second biggest thrash band of all time, which is of course Megadeth,
which just was a whole revenge project, basically.
Yeah. So and again, I think being kicked out of Metallica is really what drove Dave Mustaine to put out the music he did, because he wanted to be better than them in every aspect. And that's why, you listen to Megadeth's early records and you're listening to his playing, and it's like, this is like a lead guitar riff. This is not like a rhythm guitarist. This is someone playing like a solo the whole song. Like, you listen to like Killing Is My Business, and it's like, holy crap, how, like,
it was probably the fastest thing at the time.
Oh yeah,
it was easily I would say it's easily the fastest thing at the time, but also the musicians that he got he didn't get other thrash metal musicians. He got jazz musicians.
Yeah, he like
because they were the only ones who could really have the chops to like keep up with him.
Yeah, you had Gar Samuelson, and
Chris Poland.
Chris Poland on guitar.
And David Ellison Jr. David Ellison, also known as Junior, because he was the other Dave in the band for the longest time. He just happened to be like living underneath Dave.
Yes.
At the same apartment,
and he was going to the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles, and would be rehearsing during the day, and of course Dave is drunk, sleeping off a hangover, and got pissed off and would go down and like bang on the door and tell him to shut up, and eventually Ellison came up and was like, hey, can you go buy us some beer and stuff? Because they were like 18 or whatever, 17, 18. And of course Dave was like 21, 22 at this point. So he's like, fine. And then they, that kind of like all came together, and like that's when they started playing together. And another thrash metal legend, of course, Kerry King also briefly played with Megadeth during those early years as a guitar player. And then, of course, he went to, go on with Slayer, which is another, member 3 of the Big Four, you know?
And probably the fastest one.
Yes.
Not the most technical one, though,
no.
But they are easily the fastest one, and, like, they probably have the most rabid fan base out of all of them.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I will just say, I met Kerry King once. He was a douchebag.
Yeah.
After that, I really didn't listen to Slayer a whole lot because Slayer was my favorite band for the longest time. And then I met him and I met Dave Lombardo, the original drummer. And Dave Lombardo was super cool. And Kerry King, like, never looked up, didn't care what I had to say, just signed it, waved me off like I was nothing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm like one of the, like, I gave you money, dude. Like, I allowed you to keep doing this for a living.
Yeah.
And, like, this is the thanks I get. Okay. Like, and then within a couple of weeks, they kicked Dave Lombardo out of the band because Dave Lombardo, like, noticed what is, like, in a nutshell, he, like, alleged embezzlement is what like, discovered that, like, the funds were being misappropriated, going into, plausibly Kerry King's bank account. And he would, like, raise suspicion, and they kicked him out over it.
Yeah,
allegedly. So I haven't listened to Slayer in a long time.
Yeah, I think.
But
when Jeff died,
Jeff Hanneman,
Jeff Hanneman, of course,
the other
guitar player. I think they should have done like one more farewell tour and then been done. And then, like, after they kicked out Dave Lombardo, it was like, and they kept going. It's like, this is not even Slayer anymore. Like, and like, I don't blame Gary Holt. Like, that guy, of course, he's
probably the best guitar player out of
by far,
all of the bands
by far
in the thrash metal community.
The
guy is immaculate.
I would say maybe not
the
thrash bands.
The best would probably be Alex Skolnick.
Yeah, I was gonna say Skolnick was a jazz player too.
Yeah.
So that was huge, and you have like Marty Friedman too. It's arguable who is the best guitar player because there's so many good ones in the thrash metal scene.
I would put Gary Holt in like the top 5 then, easily in the top 5.
Yeah,
but he's
great.
He's unbelievable,
and I don't blame him for joining Slayer.
Also very cool.
And he was in Exodus for so many years, and Exodus was never like the biggest band. Obviously, like oftentimes they're lumped in with like the Big Four, as like if you want to say like the Big 6 of thrash metal. Exodus and Testament are often
or
part
Overkill,
of that group.
Depending on who you talk to. They'll throw either Testament or Overkill into that slot.
Yeah, and so Exodus though always played kind of smaller tours, unless they were on like opening for a bigger act.
They were the biggest local band for the longest time, though.
Yeah. And I think, Gary wanted to just actually make a living and be able to, like, go home and not have to work when he was done touring, So, like, I don't blame him for joining Slayer at the time.
No, not at all. It's a great paycheck.
Yeah, exactly. It's more Kerry King being a douchebag.
Yeah, I'm sure it was more money than he ever saw.
Of course.
Ever.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't blame him.
Yeah.
Anyway. I would have done the same thing.
Back to the 80s, you had Metallica came to New York. They kick out Dave Mustaine. They're getting ready to record their first album, Kill 'Em All, and they're staying with. They were like crashing basically with the Anthrax guys at the time because they were all friends. They knew each other from like the tape trading and like the Anthrax guys obviously like, oh, you guys are awesome. Like, we heard about you. We want to like play with you guys. So, and a big part of this, of course, was everyone's favorite Johnny Z, who really put together like this whole thing, and like the Old Bridge Metal Militia, which was like, this community of fans, really like headed by the Zazulas, that kind of like really cultivated the thrash metal scene on the East Coast. Like, they were like hosting people, like, the Metallica guys lived at their house while they were here, like, the Anthrax guys lived at their house, touring bands, Exodus, Testament came, and they lived with their house and stuff, and like they really went out of their way to to take these young guys and like give them like a place so that they could do what they had to do, and make music and not have to worry about like sleeping in a Walmart parking lot or something.
They made sure they were well taken care of, and they like gave everything that they had. So the Zazulas, they owned Vintage Vinyl, which was a legendary record store out in New Jersey. I think that it had been like passed down, and like it still exists in some modicum. I think that it did up until, I don't know if it did after COVID, but I know prior to COVID it was still around.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I got my original Master of Puppets vinyl.
Yeah.
But it was a really cool store, or is a really cool store. I don't know if it's still around. But They own the record store, so they already had the passion for music, and then just hearing these bands that were just like, "Whoa, what are these people doing? We've never heard anything like this before,"
yeah.
And just trying to make sure like we have to support this, and they basically formed the first thrash metal label.
Yes.
That only signed the thrash metal bands, which was Megaforce, and at the I think Metallica's first album was on there. Most of Anthrax's or at least the
their
first
80s albums were.
Yeah, all of their 80s albums were on there. You had Nuclear Assault on there, which Dan Lilker, who was the first bass player of Anthrax, ended up forming. And you had a bunch of others that were just on there.
Yeah.
Fun fact, my history teacher in high school lived up the street from the Anthrax guys in Queens.
Oh, that's awesome.
So they used to go to parties and like concerts all the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, fun, just a fun fact. Every once in a while, for years, he would like still catch up with them on tour and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that everyone, they started releasing their first albums. You had Metallica do Kill 'Em All. Megadeth with Killing Is My Business, and it was like this was like now. So Kill 'Em All came out in '83. Overkill's first album came out in like 81 or something, though, right?
Something like that. Well, Overkill was Overkill, and that's like, we're going over to the East Coast now. But,
yes.
Overkill, they were way more influenced by punk.
Yes. Like, very much so.
They even like had this weird gimmick for a while where they like dressed up as like almost these universal monsters.
Yeah.
Where like Bobby Blitz had like a cape and everything, and he would like spit blood into the crowd, because they like Kiss a lot too.
Yeah.
So they wanted to have that theatrical like presence of Kiss.
Yep.
And try to do a big stage show, like an arena show in a small club. So they had their drums on risers. They had a castle set up that they did, and there was a whole like element to it that they brought in. And Overkill has pretty much to this day always had like a big production show.
Yeah.
However they could. And their thing was blood metal, what they called it at the time, because thrash metal didn't really have a term for a while until like the mid '80s, maybe, like when a Kerrang journalist coined the phrase.
It was really, because even like Megadeth's first album didn't come out until '85. I think Anthrax wasn't like '84 or
was it '85? I thought it was like '80. I thought it was like '84.
No, I'm pretty sure Killing Is My Business was '85, and I'm pretty sure Anthrax's first album wasn't until '85.
Yeah, you're right, '85.
So Metallica had Kill 'Em All in '83. They did Ride the Lightning in '84, and then of course Master of Puppets, which is often considered their opus, was in '86.
Yeah.
And I think '86 was really the turning point. Like, you had most of the first generation thrash metal bands were like still really underground until the mid 80s. Even if they had formed, like Overkill formed in like 1980, but they were still playing
Overkill
like
was also on Megaforce. Field
Oh,
of
yeah.
Fire was 85.
What was it?
85 was Field of Fire.
That was their first album?
Yep.
Oh, I thought. See, but they had formed in like 1980 though.
Yeah, they had formed for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, they were because they were like more punk at first. Because
Yes.
they were called Virgin Killer.
Yeah. So it wasn't really until the mid 80s that these bands started to get noticed. Especially Metallica really became like big when they went on tour with Ozzy. Because Ozzy was huge at the time, of course. You know, he had left Black Sabbath in '79, started his own solo career. You know, he released Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman in '80, and of course '82. Or was it '82 that Diary of a Madman? '81 came out. I don't remember. And then
I think '81 was Blizzard of Oz, and '82
was Diary, maybe. Yeah. And of course, Randy Rose died, so he went through a number of great guitarists. Jake E. Lee, I believe, was the guitarist at the time.
Yeah, well, he was the guitarist after Randy, and just all kinds of like supernatural things happened, and it freaked him out, and he left.
Yeah.
After Bark at the Moon.
Yeah. So Ozzy took Metallica out on tour because he often did that. He would take like smaller metal bands out, and it got to the point where like the crowd was like cheering more for Metallica than they were for Ozzy. Like, and he was like, Ozzy has stated many times that like they were an incredibly hard act to follow because like and he didn't realize, he thought he was just doing them like a favor, and like, but they blew up. And I think there was this again, there was this debauchery coming out of the LA metal scene because of like and you could see this on The Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, which was a movie by Penelope Spheris about the metal scene in LA in the 80s. And I think there were some people that were kind of getting fed up with it. They were tired of like, just like the girls and stuff, and like the constant like, drug use and alcohol use, and it was just like complete debauchery, and people wanted something more. So, they came, you had something more with the thrash metal scene, and like,
because it was real.
Yeah, it was real. It was like, it wasn't like, it was so easy to tell that the glam metal bands were just completely manufactured. They were literally just doing this because they wanted to make money and have girls and drugs and parties, and that's all they were there to do.
They wanted the illusion of the rock star, of
exactly.
like the quintessential rock star life.
Yes.
And they got that.
Yeah.
But with thrash metal, it was just people who just wanted to be musicians forever.
Yes.
That was it.
Yes. And they wanted to like give their message. They wanted to sing what they wanted to sing. They weren't trying to like promote something or like say, oh, we would want to party all the time, and they weren't trying to like be like the most popular band out
like
there.
This was created with the intent of never going commercial at all.
Right.
And all other metal genres to follow, with maybe the exception of nu metal, tried this, like, had that same mentality of, we're not doing this to be cool.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really the mid 80s is really when it started to blow up, and these bands like became immensely popular because they were the alternative to like the shitty glam metal.
Well,
and
in 1986, you had the other thing was every band started, like every thrash metal band was trying to outdo the other one, so it was like a very friendly competition.
Yes.
So everyone tried to have the fastest record because what sold with the thrash metal stuff was that it was as aggressive as humanly possible.
Yeah.
So the more brutal of an album that you had, that's what people gravitated towards. Mm-hmm. So like Dark Angel.
Yeah.
On like one of their albums, there was just one sticker on it, and it was, this album has over 270 something riffs.
Yeah.
And that's all that they needed to sell it.
Yeah. And, around this time, the mid-'80s, too, is when you had the Teutonic thrash metal bands come out. And, of course, as thrash got more popular, it started to spread around the world. Metallica did European tours, Megadeth did European tours, and it kind of spread there. And then you had, of course, the German thrash metal bands. Now, you had Creator, the big three of the German thrash metal, Creator, Sodom, and Destruction. And then, if you want to say the big four, people often put Tankard in there as like the fourth, if you want to say the big four of Teutonic thrash.
Yes.
But like the German bands were like just had this whole new level of aggression. It was almost like quasi death metal. Especially Creator's like early stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost like quasi death or black metal.
Well, whatever they had done in whatever they had started in America, the German bands perfected it.
Yes.
And like, I mean, it's like stereotypical German engineering. Of course, it was it was light years better than the American stuff.
Yep.
But it was not only faster, it was meaner. The production value was better.
Yeah.
And it was way more technical.
Yes.
So people did not understand how they were playing what they were playing at that speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And playing it so well, because if you'd see an American band, an American thrash metal band on tour, like there'd be a lot of Spinal Tap moments. They wouldn't get everything down pat and everything, but with the German bands, they had their album down to a T.
Yes.
Like, there was no bullshitting these guys.
No. And, you know, you look at someone like Millie Petroza from Creator, and, like, the way he, like, played with his, like, you know, like, guitar, like, slung as low as it possibly go, like, the strap all the way out, and he's playing these crazy, intricate riffs, and, like, basically, like, bending over to do it. It's like, how is he even playing that? Like, it's crazy. And as fast as he played. Because it was, like, you know, that was like another big thing with like a lot of the thrash metal bands is that they, you know, the punk influence, they would like wear the guitars super low. Like Metallica did this. They like, you know, like hung the guitars down low. You had like people like Marty Friedman, of course, was from Megadeth, and you know, people like him that were more like guitar virtuosos that would keep it up high because they like that's how they learned how to play, and they wanted to like play these crazy intricate things. But like it was a big popular thing to keep your guitar as low as possible on the strap.
It looked cool.
It did look cool.
But if it is harder to play at like varying heights.
Yes. Yeah, so you know, you had that. I think the late 80s is really where you had like the quintessential thrash metal albums come out. You know, you had, you know, So Far So Good So What, Puppets, Master of Puppets was 86, but then, you know, they followed up with
86 had probably the best possible catalog of thrash metal albums.
Yeah.
Because you not only had Master of Puppets, you had what is referred to as the unholy trinity of thrash metal, which is Dark Angel's Darkness Descends, Slayer's Reign in Blood, which was probably the best thrash metal album of the year.
Oh yeah.
In terms of in like a pure in terms of like a purist fashion.
Yeah.
And it's also the record where Slayer really became Slayer.
Yes.
Like they figured it they figured it out they figured out their sound on Hell Awaits, but they really like knew who they were on Reign in Blood.
Yeah.
And it's definitely the fastest album of the year.
Yeah.
And the third of the unholy trinity is Creator's Pleasure to Kill.
Of course.
Which is just one of the best thrash metal albums of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you had those. And then, you know, going into the later 80s, you had, of course, Injustice for All, Testament, Practice What You Preach. Was Fabulous Disaster was 87 or 86?
I think it was 87. Let me see.
It, of course, Exodus. Great friggin' album.
89, actually.
Oh, it was 89.
That was way farther than I thought it was.
Yeah, all right. So again, you also had
Overkill. You had all four of Overkill's first albums in that short span.
Yes.
Because Overkill was a machine, and they never stopped. They put out an album every year.
Yes.
Like clockwork for a long time.
And toured incessantly, too.
Yes, they did.
To this day, even.
Oh, yeah, to this day, you still, there's a good chance that you'll see them, that they'll come to your area at least twice a year.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've seen Overkill.
I've seen them the most, too.
Just going to a show at Starland Ballroom. If it was like a metal tour, Overkill was on it, and they always played Starland Ballroom. So I've probably seen Overkill like 8 or 9 times just from that.
Easily,
just by accident.
Yes, I think I've seen Overkill and Exodus by accident the most times out of any bands that I've ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know, if 86 was like, you know, the year of like the opuses, like, you know, Master of Puppets, Reign in Blood, Pleasure to Kill. then like 87 through 89 was like where like the thrash metal became like the, I don't want to say the mainstream, but it was like that's where
that was the peak.
It was the peak of thrash metal, where you had like all these bands releasing such great albums, and all of them were like that. That was the point where like they had all been established. Now they all had gotten through their their growing pains of the first two albums, and now they're doing like this is like the best of the best.
Yes, and they're doing national tours.
Yes,
they're actually making money.
Yeah, and you have stuff like the Clash of the Titans tour, which was just like insane. It was like, what was it, Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax, Exodus, Testament, like just like these crazy tours that went like
Death
when
Angel.
we were growing up, wish we would have had something even close to it.
Yeah, well, we did get this. Well,
we did get the big four.
We did get the big four, and they did do a Thrash of the Titans redo tour.
Yeah.
Where like, which more than made up for us not being born yet.
Yeah, exactly.
That was actually one of the last times that we actually got to see like the full like original Slayer lineup too.
Yep.
Doing Seasons in the Abyss in its entirety.
Yep. Yeah, that was great.
And Testament doing doing the Legacy album.
The Legacy album
and
in its entirety.
Megadeth doing Rust in Peace.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Anthrax had didn't Anthrax also do an album in its entirety, or did they just do shows?
I think they were just doing shows. They might have done Spreading the Disease in its entirety.
No, I don't think it was that. Was it? I can't think of the name of their best album. Of their like, not Persistence of Time, but I think I what the frig was the name of the damn album? I have it on. I own it too. And I forget what it's called. And I feel like a schmuck. It's gonna come to me.
Well, you look that up. So, late 80s, the peak. 90s is where things started to change a little bit. Now, 90, 91, you didn't really see it as much. Metallica did the Black Album, which was not a thrash album. It was just like I would say it's a regular just
Among the
metal.
Living. There you go.
Oh yeah, Among the Living. They might have done all.
They might
of
have done
that. So the 90s, you had the Black Album, which was starting to stray away from thrash metal. Obviously, it was the most commercial album to that date for Metallica, and of course, is one of the greatest selling albums of all time. But it was not really a thrash metal album. It was, they had some kind of heavier, thrashier songs on there, but it was really just like a metal album.
Yeah.
Slayer did Seasons
in the Abyss, which was still...
It was still Slayer. It was still like...
Yeah.
They had some slower songs on there, but it was still like Slayer. Megadeth did Rust in Peace in 90, so that was a quintessential thrash album. That was 100%. But then they had Countdown to Extinction in 92, which was really, that was them starting to slow down too. And that was just the trend in music at the time. You had, and of course it's because of, 1991, what album came out? Nevermind. And that basically completely threw the music scene on its head. First of all, it killed off glam metal almost completely, which is a good thing because nobody liked it, except for losers, posers. And the only bands that really survived from that scene were like Guns N' Roses because, they were kind of glam metal, but they really weren't like.
They were they were bluesier, and they had kind of evolved at the time.
They were more like a more modern AC/DC. Like, I would say.
I guess.
They were kind of just like a rock band. Like a heavy... they were a hard rock band. They really didn't fall into a genre. Yeah, they had songs that were, glammier, quote-unquote, but then also, like, Appetite for Destruction. Like, that album was, like, it was, like... It's a good album. Like, there's no... Yeah. It's not, like... They just did what they wanted to do. And, they had the party songs and stuff.
Yeah, they had a little bit of everything on there. Like, I would say that album is great because it has something for everyone.
Yes. So, most of the glam bands, though, like Poison and Dokken and all those bands, Wasp, they all pretty much died. Like, they really didn't succeed at all.
Well, Wasp was weird because Wasp was like an anti-glam band.
Yeah.
So I would loosely put them in that category because they had the look, but like lyrically they were complete. They couldn't be more opposite.
Yeah, well, and there was a couple,
and
bands
they were like
that.
One of the few, they were like one of the few glam bands that like the thrash bands liked.
Yeah, and like Skid Row, I think too. They were kind of like that. Like, yeah, they were kind of like their sound was glam, but if you listen to the lyrics, they were like singing about real shit. Like, you know, like 18 in Life. You know, it's about like a guy who like is like basically like a gang member and goes to jail at like 17 because he killed somebody, and like, you know, it was like real shit. Like, and like even the name Skid Row comes from, you know, Skid Row in LA, which is a famous like street where like it's just like destitute homeless people that live, you know. So I think, you know, they kind of had the glam band sound where it was like big, you know, really big, flashy songs, but
also like, they were all like tall, like good looking white guys. Yeah, so like it was like it was like they fit under the glam banner, but they weren't really a glam band.
No, yeah, lyrically they were just a metal band, and they were like singing about real shit. So I think that kind of like, you know, they were like straddling the border there. But like the real glam bands like really died off or like changed their sound.
Yeah, and you know, it like decimated most of the thrash metal bands too, because like the ones that weren't really like there yet, they lost almost all of their momentum. So like anything under like I don't want to put it into like grades, but I would say like under like the third tier of like the thrash bands, they really, very few of them survived, and most of them had to they just reverted back to being underground.
Yeah.
So if they were making enough money to actually be musicians, they now definitely had to get like regular jobs and stuff. Like Hyrax, like I think just basically did a lot of the things specifically in South America because that's where their markets were.
And it's sad because you had
Hyrax is one of the best too, but Hyrax has always been the same, but they're way more they're way more punk.
Yes.
Just because all their songs are so fast, but they're freaking great. They're one of the most undersold and unsung like badasses of that era.
And it sucks because you had a lot of good bands that were coming out at the time that like released their first albums in 90 or 91.
Yeah.
Or like 89. That like kind of like just got thrown by the wayside because the scene completely changed and crashed. You know, you had like Zentrix, which was like this great thrash battle band from I would say they're the British Testament. Like they were great. You had a band called Stygian. I think their first album came out in 91, and it was crazy. It was like speed / thrash metal, and it was so great, like with like operatic vocals, so it was almost like power metal too. Like
you had Slammer from Britain. Like really when the UK finally really started getting into it was like the worst possible time.
It's when the whole scene died pretty much.
The UK got screwed really badly on this.
Yeah. So the bands that were bigger at the time,
because they were better bands too.
Yeah, well that's the thing. They were great, and you know, the bands that were bigger at the time of course survived. Metallica became probably the greatest American rock band during this time because they like just released these like number one album after number one album, but of course they were not thrash metal albums. Like you know, you had the Black Album, which was a straight up metal album, then you had Load and Reload, which are almost like bluesy / country albums.
Yeah, they're more like just like a blues rock album.
Yeah, and then you know they did Garage Inc., which was cool because it was covers. They did like the Misfits covers and stuff like that, which was good. But like, you know, you didn't have Metallica really release kind of a thrashier album again until Death Magnetic in 2008. So this is like almost 20 years after, you know, their last thrash metal album.
Yeah.
And then same thing with Megadeth.
I mean, they slowed down a lot for a while.
Yes,
they did. Up until the system has failed.
Yeah,
a lot of their albums were a lot slower.
Rock band, like a hard rock band, essentially. And again, not to say, you know, a lot of like the thrash purists like, oh, they suck now, and like didn't listen to them anymore. I like the 90s Metallica and Megadeth stuff. I'll listen to it sometimes. It's fine. You know, it's not like terrible. It's just, it's different.
I don't care for the 90s Metallica stuff. There's some good things on it.
Yeah.
I don't particularly like the albums all that much, but I can cherry pick a couple of songs in there.
The problem with Load and Reload is there was too many songs. There was too much filler. If they cut it down and took the best songs from both albums and then made one single album, it would have been great.
Yeah, like Unload, basically.
Yeah, or Reloaded.
That would have been good. But
Unloaded, yeah.
Yeah. If and the 90s Megadeth stuff I don't mind.
No.
Because it's like it still has like a couple of like thrashy songs in there
Euthanasia
like every now and then.
It's a great fucking album.
It's
like it's a hidden gem, I think.
It is. And Anthrax's 90s catalog with John Bush is some of their best stuff.
Yeah.
Sound of White Noise is one of their best albums.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that whole thing.
And you know what? Some of Slayer stuff is
Slayer
not
stuff
terrible.
Slayer really didn't change all that much.
No, they only got really kind of shitty.
Their production got worse.
Yeah, and when in like the early 2000s was when they kind of released a couple of questionable albums. Like God Hates Us All.
God Hates Us All was okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's not their best though.
No, it isn't.
It's
and then it was the 7-string guitar experimentation that was like, it was okay on that album, but it was like, and I think they kind of like noticed that too. It was like, that's nice, but let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Even Creator stuff slowed down a lot.
Yeah, they became almost industrial in a lot of ways. And but again,
not
terrible
go
songs.
Figure, it's Europe, so like maybe some stuff would like you'd hear it in nightclubs.
Yeah. But you had like, what is it? Oh shit, what's that song that they still play live that they came out in the 90s? That's really good.
Coma?
What is it?
What is it? Well, no, I'm sorry. Coma of Souls is the album, but
no, it's not that.
What do you mean?
Oh shit. It's like I can hear it on the top of my head, but I can't I don't know the name. Damn it! It's like right on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, Phobia.
Yeah, Phobia.
Yeah, Phobia is a great song.
And again,
it's one of my favorites. Actually,
it was like you could say it's not really a thrash metal song, but it's a great song. So, the bigger ones they survived by doing that, by changing their sound and adapting, and like I think really that's like what you had to do at that time. Like again, because the underground thrash metal bands that were like really pure thrash just died.
Yeah,
and even Exodus, they had like
Exodus went through a really rough
grungy
period.
album almost like.
Yeah. Well, it had the weird. It was just the art. Even the artwork was weird. Like it looked like it would look like a modern art painting.
Yeah, it was weird.
What the hell was the name of that one? I've only heard. I've listened to it like a couple of times, and it's like it's not awful, but it's like this should not have the name Exodus on it.
Let me see if I can look it up.
It's on the top. It's on the tip of my tongue too. The one with the freaking Picasso like art. I don't know how else to describe it.
Force of Habit?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
How can I not say that? It's a phrase that I use all the time. Yeah, what is that?
It is very strange. Yeah. So, yeah, and again, that was like almost like a grunge album. It was very weird. And this is just what they were doing.
Which is weird because that came out like right after my favorite Exodus album, Impact is Imminent.
Yeah, oh yeah. Which
and that
a lot
one
of
was
people,
great.
Yes. So, again, so the thrash scene kind of dies off in the 90s. And then early 2000s, it kind of starts to come back a little bit. You had Exodus release Tempo the Damned came out in 2004, and that was really a return to their roots. That was like a thrash metal album, and a lot of bands in the early 2000s started. And then,
well, unfortunate for Exodus was when they did the live album, and it was nice to have the double tour with the original singer Paul Bailoff,
which was great. That live album was amazing.
Steve Souza, it is. We can't do this podcast without talking about Paul Bailoff.
Of course,
around that time, where like just when things were starting to get great with like Paul Bailoff again, he passed away.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to be on Tempo of the Damned, and complications occurred. But Paul Bailoff is often described as the John Belushi of thrash metal, and it couldn't be it couldn't be a more perfect fit.
Yeah.
Paul Bailoff was this maniac monster of a frontman, and he really worked the best with. He wasn't on many Exodus albums. He was only really on the first one, and he there's demo tracks for the second album, Pleasures of the Flesh, but he had this bombastic energy on stage that could not be captured by anyone else, where he was going a million miles an hour. He was getting the fans involved. He was he was so true to the music and that lifestyle surrounding it. He partied very, very hard.
Yeah. And
but
he was actually responsible. So, like,
he was responsible for a lot of like the culture of thrash metal.
Yeah, he would go out on stage and say, like, I want to see a dead poser tonight. And, like, the thrash kids would go out and find some glam metal kid and just beat the crap out of him. Like.
Or, he would carry garden shears with him. So if he saw somebody wearing, like, a Poison shirt or something, or a glam metal thing, he would, like, cut up their shirt and, or wear it.
If they wore, like, the jacket with, like, the frills, like, that was a big thing. They would wear these leather jackets with the frills. They would go and clip the frills off of them and stuff like that.
God, that man is, like, responsible for so much property damage.
There was a awesome book.
I'm sure there's a billion other stories of, like, things that he did that we'll never know.
There's an awesome book that I have, and I think you might have it too. It's Murder in the Front Row.
Yeah, you bought it for me.
Yeah, so it was a picture book of all, like...
It's since become a documentary, too.
Yes. It was Harold O, who is the bass player of DRI now, which is... We really didn't touch on crossover thrash.
Not yet. But we're
getting
there.
We'll do that briefly. But
I would say, like, Hyrax is the start. It's, like, where... Like, all that we've talked about of crossover so far, but we'll get
essentially,
there.
Crossover, just to preface this, crossover is thrash metal, except it's more of the hardcore punk influence. So it's basically like thrash metal, but falling back into hardcore punk. It's interesting. So you had Harold O, who's the bassist player of DRI now, who was a photographer at the time in the 80s and took a lot of the pictures. And then, of course, Brian Liu.
A lot of the more famous pictures that you'll see on the back of those old thrash metal albums.
Yeah. Like the guy walking on the crowd, like that was like, and again, that became a line in, the DRI song Thrash Hard, like people walking on the crowd, because that's literally what would happen. Like, there wasn't crowd surfers, they would just walk on the crowd, and like, the early thrash metal shows were like just absolutely insane, like violent mosh pits and like, and just craziness.
Just willingly throwing themselves with off the stage, off of amplifiers with caution to the wind.
Yes. And like, if you got injured, you didn't care. You picked yourself up, you friggin' like spit out the blood, and you kept thrashing.
Yeah.
Like, it was just like a crazy genre of music. Cause
any
it was so
old
pure.
timer that I've run into has always just said that was the best.
Yeah.
Or like they've always had like weird stories, like, oh yeah, I saw them in '83. My friend broke his hip. It was the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
it was the best. Yeah, it was always the best. Even if they like died, it's like, oh yeah, my friend got a concussion and broke his spine in 3 places. It was the best.
Yeah,
like,
it was fucking Slayer in 1984 at Lemoore, baby. There was like one guy. He was like, he was like the dad of like one of my brother's baseball teams. And he was like yeah, the man was responsible for all 11 children.
Oh yeah.
No. The entire team was his. He got around. Big Daddy Dudley, they used to call him. No, it was some guy, and he was like, we always used to just like talk about like metal when like, while like my brother's team was playing, if I had to go watch him, and he was always like, I saw Slayer in '86.
He sounded like Carl from.
I mean, they all kind of do, because they all like smoked. They were all like chain smokers, so they all have it now. So he was like, I saw Testament in '83. I saw Overkill 17 times in '81 alone. Great fucking band, man. What a show. And I got laid one time in there, and then we went down over to the bar, and then there's Bobby Blitz doing coke, and then Tom Araya's over there, and he's doing something, and then we talked over to we went over to see Overkill again, and then up the street there was like 5 more shows going on, so we saw 16 bands in one night. It was a fucking fantastic show.
And I loved
what else
it.
could you do? And I loved it. My wife Marsha was in there too. It was nice.
Oh god.
That's like that's basically what you get if you talk to the old timers.
Yeah.
Or like there's just some other guy who's just like, I saw Violence in '83. I saw these guys in '83. I broke my teeth at one of their shows. Let's rock it. Let me tell you, there's some sons of bitches there. They're like, or like some people would be like, I saw Possessed with Jeff Becerra was still walking, and that was a great show. And then I seen him when he's in the wheelchair, and that was an even better show.
Yeah.
I don't even know how it happened. Like, there's all these guys that you just talk to, and if you talk to any of the women, they're always like, yeah, they were slamming guitars, and it was wonderful. I had a great time. They also chain smoked.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you're kind of like, I bet you were hot, but
not now.
All the wear and tear that drugs and alcohol have done to you.
Got some city miles on you. Oh yeah.
It's an interesting show.
Well, and that was always the great thing for us coming up. So, thrash metal really started to come back to its own in the early 2000s, and then like you had like the old bands releasing more thrashy albums again, and then of course you had this new generation that was of course the new wave of thrash metal, the new wave of American thrash specifically, even though there was other bands from other countries. I don't know why they called it that, but it was
I guess because it really like got the traction in the States.
It got the traction in the States, but
it
like,
was happening everywhere around the same time in like a weird hive mind thing. Which,
yes.
I mean, I guess it makes sense because like, you and I hadn't met at the time, but like when we were in our early years of high school or even like the later years of middle school, we started getting interested in this kind of music.
Yeah.
So I'm, of course, other people across the world, the same things were happening to them.
Yeah.
And like, or maybe like for some of them, their parents listened to this and they liked it by default.
Yeah.
So like, it's pretty easy to see how it happened, but just people kind of wanted to create that again because for the longest time, there wasn't really any metal.
No.
Like there was some metal, like I mean the biggest metal band at the time, like for the longest time, was Pantera because it was the closest thing to thrash metal, which Pantera was originally a glam band.
And you had death metal bands that kind of kept the it alive during the 90s. You had, of course, Cannibal Corpse, you had Death,
Obituary, and then you had the grind bands, which kind of kept the crossover elements alive too.
Yeah.
But it like and then we've talked about black metal extensively on the show. If you want to go back like to an old episode, they're like doing their own thing, but there were all these other genres, but thrash metal was dormant.
Yes.
I mean, even doom metal like became a thing, and like Typo Negative was also one of the biggest bands at the time.
Yep.
And the weird thing was thrash, like, it just wasn't there, and people were like, why isn't anyone doing this anymore?
Yeah. And so people started doing it again.
Like I remember even when I like first started playing in bands and I first started forming bands, they were all thrash metal bands, and most of like a lot of times I would like get the same reaction from people who were like, why are you playing thrash metal? Or like, why do you want to do this?
Yeah.
Or they would be like, oh, well, like there was like some weird like brocore stuff going on.
Oh yeah.
At the time in New York, and they were like, why aren't you doing this? It was like this weird screamo thing that sucked.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, why don't you do this? Or like, why don't you just tune to like,
drop A.
Yeah. And I was like, because I don't want to do that. I'm like, the only band that is any good in drop A is Nile, and I can't play that good.
Yeah.
So like, I was like, why can't we play something like Slayer? And they're like, and the only song they would know was Raining Blood, and it would bother me because I was like, there's other good songs that you could learn, and we should do stuff like that. And it was really hard to find anybody who wanted to play that.
Yeah.
For the longest time. And then, of course, like, a few years go by, and everyone's like, oh, hey, don't you play thrash metal? And I'm like, yeah, what's it to you?
For me, it was like, when I started playing guitar in high school, like, I was learning more like old school like rock. So I like learned a lot of Pink Floyd. I learned a lot of Black Sabbath. Like I was in that kind of thing. And then I like right after I graduated, like literally like the summer after high school.
Thrash metal for years.
Well, the summer after high school,
I was fast.
I really started to get more into like Metallica and stuff like that, and Megadeth, and like I met our friend Roberto, and like he was like, we would play guitar together, and he'd be like, oh, he would show me how to like, palm mute and do all this like crazy like picking and stuff, and I'll be like, oh damn, that's fast. I like that. It's aggressive. It's fast. And like I had played like punk rock, like I liked the Ramones. The Ramones were one of my favorite bands in high school growing up. So I played
still
some punk
shows
rock.
in your sound.
Yes,
the Ramones stuff.
And like, so like when I really started getting into thrash metal,
which I think was what made our sound so unique.
Yeah. And well, it was like the natural progression for me because like I almost followed the exact progression that the bands that we got influenced by followed in the 80s. Like I started out playing just rock music, and then like punk music and then metal, and it's like, wait a minute, I could combine punk and metal and make this crazy fast aggressive music. And then like we just started playing thrash metal. I was like, this is what I want to do. Like I want to play thrash metal. This is like the purest, best form of heavy metal music. And especially at the time, like when I was in high school and early in college, like I was just angry at the world.
Oh yeah.
And like,
well, I'd say I was angry at the world up until like up until a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And like, it was just like it made sense to me. The music made sense. It's like, this is the music I want to play because this is how I feel.
Yeah.
Angry. And I want to like say what I want to feel, and I want to like be able to speak my mind and not like have someone say, oh, you can't say that. It's like, no, I'm going to say it, and this is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
and
this was my way of expressing myself.
Exactly. And like, I don't think there was any genre better than thrash metal to do that. Like, it was really like, it was great. It was perfect. That's like, this is exactly how I feel, and I'm going to put it into music.
Yeah. Like, just channeling all my stress and frustration into music and just writing something, and just being able to remember all of the different combinations that I would play was just wild.
Yeah.
Like, looking back at it, because it's just like, I mean, I could probably go back and just like play whatever the first thrash song that I ever wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a band called Straight Jacket, and for the long, like, I feel like I could probably still play a few of those things.
Yeah.
It was just a fun time, but it was crazy because like I don't know how I had such good memory for all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I could probably still do it on instinct just because like the memory in my hands I've done this so many times.
Yeah.
That like it's impossible for me to forget.
Yeah.
Like I feel like even if I went into a coma and like you put a guitar in my hand, I could like my coma dreams, I would start playing that. I don't know.
While you're Kevin Finnerty?
Yeah, but I don't know. I'd be having my weird Tony Soprano dreams too. So, and like God knows what I'd see in those.
Yeah. So, and when we came up, that was really like the height of the new wave of thrash metal. And, we came up with so many good bands, like we played the first shows of like, our first show was Condition Critical's first show, and they blew up, and they were so great.
That night, the minute after that they got off stage, I said, "You are never opening a show ever again."
Yeah, and they didn't. That was like they were like,
Well, I mean that show, like they were christened Demolition Hammer Jr. Depending on who you speak to, it was either me or Ray Brutal, and our friend Ray. From who at the time the band Bomb Scare,
which was also their first show.
Also their first show too.
It was like and this was like in the tri-state area we had a really good scene. Like when it first came out, like we had the camaraderie that they had in the 80s. Like we were all friends. We knew the guys. Like we were great friends with the Toxicology guys. No, Toxicology was more like grindcore, but
but they fit in.
Yeah, they fit in perfectly. We would all play shows together.
They were also the perfect. They were also the perfect like thing to break up the bill, so that it wasn't only thrash metal.
Exactly.
So like everyone was happy to have them.
Yeah.
They were like the perfect buffer, and that and they were happy too because that always meant that they'd get a good spot on the card.
Oh yeah, and people went wild for them too. Yeah. Like it would be like crazy, and
well, also because they would be excited that there was something else. Like they would be like,
yes,
wait, there's a grind band on this too.
Yeah.
And it was perfect.
And, then we had, so basically, like, we did all these shows at a place called the Meat Locker, which was this tiny little venue that was a hole
still
in the
exists.
Wall. And, you would open the door and get hit in the face by the smell of vomit and beer and weed and cigarettes. And, like, you went down this friggin' long-ass hallway that was covered with graffiti. The floor was, like, covered with grime. You go down these stairs that are, like, rickety and falling apart.
It was
like this basement.
Don't ever take a dump in there.
No, it was like
you would you would almost like
you could probably get hepatitis just by
looking at the toilet.
Exactly.
It was like it was like use the bathroom at your own risk in there. Do anything at your own risk in there. Really, like honestly, every show it was kept in like just enough of a condition for it to run itself.
Yes,
and it was only like a hazard or two away from like crumbling.
It was our CBGB.
Yes.
It was like the metal, like the New York, New Jersey metal scene. That was our CBGB. Like so many shows went through there, and so many touring bands came through there that were like amazing. You know, like Hexen.
Yes.
And
I'm happy that I got to play with Hexen and Mantic Ritual.
Oh yeah, and Mantic Ritual. So I mean, so many great bands that we played with there. And, you know, of course, Cancer Slug, again, not thrash metal, but amazing to play with. You know, it was just like, there's so many great memories, so many core memories that we had from that place, you know. And then, like, you know, playing other venues around, like the Stanhope House, you know, another great one. You know, we played, was it Gussie's in Queens that one time?
Yeah, that was a cool place.
Yeah, it was a cool place too.
And also, you had our pal Stacy, who we haven't talked to in many years.
Of course, the Belfry.
Also, I mean,
great, and again, just a basement with a stage, and that's all you needed. And that was like such.
It was this crazy Russian girl in Staten Island whose parents loved her.
Yes,
that's basically what happened.
They let her put on these giant shows at her house in her basement
with like full crowds because she invited pretty much a whole high school.
Oh yeah, there would be like 50 people in this tiny little ass room. It was not fire safe at all.
No, but we had wonderful memories, and who could forget the politically incorrect masterminds known as Ego Kill.
Oh, of course.
I absolutely love those guys.
Yes, they I mean, and from, you know, they were from Rockland County, New York. You know, the 845 was their big song. You know, and we had the guys from, you know, New York, like, you know, Bomb Scare. We had guys from South Jersey, which was the Condition Critical guys. You know, we played with Lich King, and we put on our own show here. That was another thing. We had a barbecue show that we would do every year, and just invite all these bands to come up to like my garage and just play music and eat food, and it was like the greatest thing ever.
And it was your dad was the MVP of those shows because he'd go to like the restaurant, like, I don't know what you want to call it, the Restaurant Depot, and he had like the big teepee, and he'd just barbecue all day, like God knows how much food, and everybody was fed, everybody had a great time, everybody was just
drank
like
beer and just fucking and went crazy.
Everybody was like, when are you doing this again?
Yeah,
and the crowds kept getting bigger and bigger until we just decided that it was
just
time.
too much. Yeah, it was too much.
I wouldn't even say it was
expense.
It was too much as a personal expense, but also we were just like, it's time.
Yeah, and well, this was like, again, this is the part where,
because otherwise the next thing that we'd have to do is we'd have to actually start like renting a space and like charging for tickets and doing it as a whole like Maryland Death Fest thing.
Yeah, and this was the downfall of the scene too. Like, or was around that time. You know, we played for how long? We were together for what, 7 years, 6 years?
We had just put out our album when it started to like kind of go, and
like it kind of almost followed like the actual thrash metal. So like the new wave of thrash metal, like very much was like a very quick, like almost like the original thrash metal. Like it was there and then it was gone again. And like, you know, a lot of the bands broke up. A lot of the bigger bands like Evil and Gamma Bomb from the UK.
They kind of just stayed back in their areas because they couldn't make money overseas so much anymore.
Yeah, and that was the problem. Like the cost of travel.
Like another fun fact was I interned at E-Rake Records around that time. I got to know those guys in Bonded by Blood a little bit from like helping them out and just doing some stuff.
Yeah.
I used to just interview bands all the time for like, you know, sites that I was writing for and just my own podcasts and things that I wanted to do. And I got to know I got to know a bunch of those people pretty well. I helped Bonded by Blood, like just finding some like places to eat and like just helping them out with like where to go on the road and like where they could stay, or like trying to direct them to like, you know, what would make the most sense for them to like to just like have a great time and stuff. If the like when they like on their first tour out here, really. Or like one of their first tours out here.
Yeah. Well, and I think the problem is that, you know, all these bands would go on these huge tours and, you know, they're playing shows and then they're barely breaking even. And they're going home with nothing
I know
to show
you don't
for it.
like them, but like Warbringer was probably the biggest band at the time, like of the new wave of thrash metal.
Yeah.
But they, you know, they were great too, and you couldn't get away from those guys. No. They were on every bill, but like even so, like you said,
it was impossible to make money. And the cost of like you either had to buy a shitty van that would break down, and then that would be another expense, or you rented a van, and that was like insanely expensive. Then the cost of gas and food, and like you never stayed in a hotel. You weren't able to because like that was just an expense if you needed that money for gas and food. And so, you had guys that were like staying in like Walmart parking lots or McDonald's parking lots and like not showering for 3 days.
And they were on these big tours.
Yeah. And it became like to the point where and then, in the local scene, we were experiencing, these very predatory venue owners that were like.
That's the main reason why we did our own shows and we booked out of the Meat Locker. Because 1 week, that's the only way that we could actually make money. And 2, that's the only way we could guarantee a crowd because. You'd have these and I'm using the word promoter very loosely.
They were not promoters.
They were not.
They were they did not promote.
No, they were promoters in name only, and they were just they had somebody do a flyer, and that was their job basically done.
And they basically they put it on the bands to sell tickets.
Yeah, and then they would gaslight the bands for not bringing people into their venue, which it's
and they'd be like, "Oh, we're gonna have a show on a Wednesday night." And you're going to go on at 1 a.m. And it's like, okay, well, I'll be lucky if I can get 5 of my friends to show up to that.
Yeah.
Because it's a Wednesday night at 1 a.m. People have work. They have jobs. They have school. Like, we can't. It's how? Like.
Yeah. And then we wouldn't even get paid anyway.
Right.
Even if we like we brought like 30 people and the guy was like, you might actually get paid. And it was like, what do you mean we might actually get paid?
Yes. No, it's like we should be getting paid. We're fucking playing a show.
Yeah.
And then like of course
this is why Lich King put out sends over a guaranteed contract that like if we don't get paid then we're not playing.
Yeah.
And they have to and it's a legally binding document.
But again, that's because Tom is he's older, I got his own job, so he is like, yeah, I'm not gonna do this for free. Like I'm I have bills to pay and shit like
and
that.
I mean now Tom isn't I think he may only sing for on recordings and at the home shows.
Yeah, pretty
they've
much.
got another guy for the road.
Yeah,
and our friend Mike from Condition Critical is the bass player over there now too.
Yep. Yeah, so it sucks because it really the venues kind of created this ugly competition in the scene. And I think that's what killed off a lot. Because, there were bands, we were trying to get the unity back and saying, look, we have to stand against this. We can't play these venues. And, we had guys, the Bomb Scare guys, Ray Brutal was, super, on board with this. And he's like, yeah, we're not playing these shitty venues anymore.
Well, he would, he would play a show at, he would play a show for this shitty promoter, unbeknownst to the promoter, that he was going to trash them later that night on stage when it was too late.
Yeah, and I think he got in a fight with, one guy once and stuff about it. They tried to, kick him out, and, it was a brawl.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, he was on board, but unfortunately, a lot of the younger bands that were coming up at the time just didn't care. And they were like, well, we want to play shows, so we don't care. We'll do it. And
yeah, they went the other way, and they enabled the problem.
Yeah, and it really... It
and
just
they never learned, and a lot of them never learned anything, which is sad.
It is sad, and they're still trying to struggle and do that and play shows. That first of all, the thrash metal scene at this point is again dead,
non-existent.
It's dormant. Yeah, people have kind of moved on. I think doom metal has been
came back a lot, and grind came back a lot.
Yeah.
Now it's coming back into death metal, and there's actually a good death metal scene in New York now again.
Yeah.
Steve, who was the drummer in Bomb Scare, is in another band called Festergore now, and Devin, the bass player in Toxicology, oh god, I don't remember the name, and I feel so bad. But I'll try to find them. But he's in a death and roll band now that also plays shows with them a lot. And there's another one called Tombstoner that is really good that came out during the pandemic, and they've been killing it.
And I think the black metal scene is really still thriving, kind of too. You have a lot of black metal bands.
Yeah, you saw a resurgence in that too.
They kind of took a hit because of the association of black metal with the Nazi ideology in some instances. It kind of got labeled on the whole genre. And so a lot of black metal bands were getting attacked by Antifa, even if they weren't fascist or Nazi, they were getting protests outside the venues, and venues were canceling them just for that fact.
Yeah.
But I think they're still kind of doing well. the metal scene again, it ebbs and flows, and different genres experience different surges of popularity. And there might be another surge of thrash metal again in the future. I think it's possible. But I think a lot of the thrash metal bands, the old ones, or like the ones from the new wave of heavy metal or thrash metal, have kind of like either broken up completely or changed their sound. And they're kind of playing different genres now rather than thrash. And
Oxalate, that's the name of the band.
Okay. And then you have, like the older thrash metal bands, which they're just really now putting out music just because, like, they know people will buy it pretty much. Like Metallica's newest album is actually quite good. I think I was pleasantly surprised by how good it was.
I haven't listened to it yet. I listened to the single and I liked it.
It was better than their last album, definitely. So that was good. Megadeth's newest album is okay too. I like the new guys that are playing, like Kiko Loureiro and
well, he's really good.
And was it Dirk Van Buren? I forget the drummer's name, but he's great too. So I think they're good. And of course they got James LaMezzo back now.
Well, yeah, because there were things that happened with
David Ellefson.
David Ellefson
again,
who he was being a creep at the very least.
But apparently he actually wasn't, and like it got blown out of proportion. No, so the girl that he was allegedly like sexting with or doing whatever was an adult, a consenting adult.
Yeah, she was like 19 or something, right?
Yeah, so they had.
He was just a creep. He wasn't like a pedo or anything like people were labeling him.
No, yeah.
Or like a groomer or whatever. Like
she was like an adult and like it was a consensual like mutual thing. Like it wasn't like him creeping on some girl. Like if they were both like whatever. But I mean that's whatever.
That's whatever
his personal
it is.
thing with his wife or whatever. Like I don't know what's going on there, but whatever. Like should he have been fired from Megadeth over it? Probably not. Like it was, especially like after it came out that really it was nothing. But
yeah, but whatever. That's another like this like weird cancel culture stuff is a thing for another day.
Yeah.
We will spend too much time. We'll waste too much time talking about things now.
Yeah.
But we didn't really get like. It has kind of come back around into other genres, but like thrash metal has just kind of gotten like a bit dormant again.
Yeah.
I mean, you still see like you don't nearly see as many thrash metal bills as you used to or hear about them.
If anything, it's like a mix of metal genres, and you'll have like one or two thrash bands, but with like a death metal band and a grindcore band,
which I think in a mixed bag is like the best way to go.
Yeah,
sometimes,
I think it's fine
because you get to see a little bit of everything, but also. You got a lot of great tour packages that we got to see in like the 2009 was probably the best year.
Yeah.
For like
2009,
so many
2009 through 2011 was like probably like those were like the prime like you couldn't beat those tour packages that were coming out.
No, you couldn't.
And you probably won't get anything that good again. It's just
at least not at
one show that we went to.
At least not at the price points that we were playing.
It was the Creator show. It was Creator,
Voivod,
Evil, Lazarus AD, like I forget.
Overkill was also on that.
Yeah, just these insane tour packages. It's like, people growing up in the 80s were probably like, I wish we had something that good. And now I'm like I say the same thing.
Too.
Oh, I know, and
it was
that's
dirt cheap. And I mean, now Ticketmaster has like a whole nother problem altogether.
And I saw this happening when we were going to shows back in the early 2010s and like into like the early 2010s, so like 2013, 2014. I was seeing this happen because I saw that Live Nation was buying up all these little venues in New York City, like all these like old theaters were being bought up by Live Nation. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is not going to be good. Like, this is bad. This is going to be turned into a monopoly.
Yep.
And lo and behold, Live Nation went under and got bought out by Ticketmaster, and now Ticketmaster basically owns every venue.
Yeah.
That like these metal bands would play at, and not only are they like putting on like shittier tours that are way more expensive than they should be, but then like it's rare, and they'd rather put on friggin' these shitty techno and DJs and stuff that like will fill the hall with like people that just want to dance and get fucking and do ecstasy and stuff.
Well, also they can like overcharge as much as they want for that because it's like more mainstream.
Yes. So they'll freaking do that for
because the bands are getting hurt really badly because they'll like force them like the venues will force them to like mark up their like T-shirts and like all of their merchandise, which is the only way that they really make their money now.
Yeah, and when we were coming up, you went to a show like a metal show like a smaller show like Destruction, when they did the Destruction tour where it was Destruction and Forbidden and all that. I think it was, I don't remember, it was Destruction, Forbidden, and it might have been, I don't remember who the other opener was. It was one of the newer thrash bands, but I don't remember. Anyway, you could get a t-shirt. It wasn't Havoc. It might have been, it wasn't Hexen. Maybe Rattlehead?
No,
I don't remember.
I don't think Rattlehead was on that bill.
Regardless,
anyway,
it doesn't matter. It might have been Warbringer, actually.
I could see that.
You could buy a t-shirt. T-shirts were $20. Sweatshirts were usually $35 to $50, and sweatbands or whatever were $5 to $10 depending on what band it was. And now it's you go to a show
everything
and
is
it's
$65
for a friggin' t-shirt.
Yeah, and at that rate, you and then if you just wait a few months for it to go on wholesale at JSR Direct, because nobody's gonna buy that.
Yeah.
So you'll just get what you want for what it should be, and it's not it's not even the bands, it's not the bands marking it up.
No,
it's
you'll the see venues. The venues are charging extra fees just to have a merch table.
Yeah,
which is insane.
Well, because that's how bad it is with the way that albums sell now, because it nothing was adjusted for inflation, so everyone gets paid the same rate that they would have gotten paid in 1950s.
I know, it's
when
crazy.
When people like Johnny Cash and Elvis could actually when 35 cents actually meant something.
Yeah, and you could make a living.
Yeah, we're now you got to split $1 10 ways, and 6 of those ways get paid first before the band, and then the band has to split they barely have 2 nickels to rub together.
It's crazy.
It's it is impossible for them to make money, and then with streaming, it's even worse.
Oh yeah,
because I saw an interview with Danny Filth from Cradle of Filth. They're a symphonic black metal band, and they're very big. For those of you who don't know, they're one of the biggest symphonic black metal bands, and he was I don't know how the people who run Spotify aren't in jail for ripping off all of these artists, because they people think that I'm a multi-millionaire because I'm in a big band, and I'm not. He's we had 22 million plays on Spotify last year, and I got $20.
Yeah, it's crazy. You're getting half a penny for 100,000 friggin' plays.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
And Congress, it doesn't affect Congress, so they'll never get to it.
No. So it's crazy, things, and again, everything ebbs and flows. I think, a lot of people have been saying there's going to be a big, especially since COVID, that there's going to be a big reckoning in the music industry, and we might see a collapse kind of because of everything that's going on, and the crazy ticket prices and all that, and the streaming, terrible royalties from streaming. And it might not be a bad thing, because from the ashes will rise something better.
Well, they'll have to.
How it works.
They'll have to. There won't be another choice before enough platinum artists are just I can't afford my mortgage.
Right.
And my house is a normal house. It's not a mansion.
Yeah.
A non-Beyonce, basically.
Yeah. I think there really needs to be almost a union movement in the music industry, kind of, for bands to come together and, form some kind of organization that fights for rights of artists and bands,
Yeah,
and you kind of have that with ASCAP, but that's really only for licensing and royalties. It's not really.
It's not much for anything else.
Yeah, it doesn't handle contracts or anything like that. So I think there really needs to be something more. Bands have to come together, and again, we kind of had that in the scene, and then these younger bands came in and were well, we just want to play music, and they
ruined it for everybody.
Exactly,
because we had told them, we had told them many times, don't do this instead.
Yeah,
just book your own show, do this instead.
Yeah,
help put the money back into our system.
Scene.
Put it back into the scene.
Yeah,
and they it was too hard and they didn't do it, or they just didn't want to do it. And because these
the easy path.
because these venues kept luring them in with exposure to play with a huge band, and the huge band was going on at DRI would go on at 2:00 in the morning.
I know.
And it was well,
it's
DRI
crazy.
got screwed, and now the bands that opened for them, that's all that's left.
Yeah.
So like, what was the point?
Yeah. It was, and yeah, it's stupid. It was stupid, and and again, that's what led to kind of like the situation we're in now, where there's just not as much live music now because
and also a lot of venues closed.
Yeah. So, but yeah.
But I mean, there's a few thrash scenes that we didn't talk about. That I mean, you had it all over the world.
Of course.
Like South America, for one.
Yeah.
You had like more of like a death black metal kind of approach to it.
You had Sepultura, and that really had like this heavy sound.
Yeah.
There was also a Japanese
Sarcophago,
scene.
which they were also they were like a darker Sepultura.
Yeah.
Like for some reason in the South American Spanish countries, they gravitated a lot more towards the satanic stuff, which is interesting. But when you think about the culture, it makes a lot of sense because South America was it was very colonized by the conquistadors.
Yeah.
So it like everywhere. So like it's similar to Norway. There's a lot of Christianity in there. So the perfect counterculture is anti-Jesus, basically, or just like satanic stuff.
Kind of what happened with Scandinavia a lot too.
Yeah,
with black metal.
Yeah, which with the thrash metal stuff, you see a lot in the South American countries, and also death metal is huge in South America.
Yep.
So
just metal in general is huge in South America, and I think it's because like they don't get as much, so they appreciate it way more down there than anybody else does anywhere else in the world. And that's you had like you watch like Megadeth's like that one one night live in Buenos Aires, and it's like
that's had to have been the best show that they ever played.
The crowd is not only singing all the lyrics, they're singing every guitar part perfectly. It's crazy. So it was a whole different scene. Then there was a Japanese thrash metal scene, and I think that was also very much influenced by black metal a lot.
Yeah, and it also a lot more. It was like more like the black metal and like hardcore horror punk stuff. So like it was much faster.
Yeah,
some German stuff in there too. Like Fast Kill is one of the ones that came out like more recently that they and they've been doing it for a long time.
Yep,
but they are like very appreciative too. Like I had like just mentioned something to like the singer Toshio Omori, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was a long time ago, but I just reached out to him on Facebook and I was like, I love you guys are great. And he was like, oh my god, an American person like has heard of our music. And I was like, yeah, how could you not? This music is tremendous, I love it.
Yeah.
And he was like, where do you live? And I like gave him my address, not like expecting anything, and then like 2 months later there's a Fast Kill t-shirt
that's amazing
that like comes in. I wish I still had that shirt.
Yeah,
but like I was like, dude, like this is the coolest, nicest thing ever. And I don't even know you. I've never met this person.
Yeah,
if you're listening out there, Toshio, thank you, I appreciate you.
Yeah, and just the scene's different scenes around the world. You had, and
like
then of course
Canada, you had probably the most talented musicians in Annihilator and Slaughter,
Exciter, which they were more like speed metal, but you could probably lump them in with the thrash scene. And they were like super Canadian. Like I don't know if you ever heard them do interviews, but they were like,
I have.
Oh, they had the friggin' typical Canadian accent. It was ridiculous. Like
they all
they were
sounded
from Vancouver. So.
They all sound like Bret Hart.
Yeah. And then there was the British scene. The British had a decent scene. I think a lot of the British scene was influenced a lot by Testament and Exodus.
Yeah. And Italy too. Italy had like more of the Maiden kind of sound to it because their stuff was more overdriven as opposed to like very distorted, which we didn't even really talk about the sound.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I guess that would be like the note to kind of end on.
Yeah.
No pun intended. You also had Texas, the
Texas scene was pretty great.
Texas had a lot of the hardcore stuff.
Yeah, DRI was originally from Texas.
Yep.
They were billed a lot from the Bay Area, but they actually did come from Texas.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was like a lot of the crossover bands came from Texas, and it's interesting.
And also you had Rigor Mortis, who was one of the heavier bands of all time, and
that
influenced Pantera and a lot of the southern areas. They all were like more speed metal driven.
Yeah, and like kind of groove metal too.
Yeah, which you kind of got from like in the later years, one of the bands that we helped out, Incinerator.
Yeah.
And also and also Terrorizer.
Yeah.
Which, great band.
It's interesting because you look at like the different regions, especially in the United States, of like, and this is true across all genres, like the hip hop scene. You look how different it sounds on the East Coast compared to the West Coast, and then like Texas was always kind of like a combination of both coasts, and it's like the same for the thrash metal scene. Like, you had
Terrorist. I'm sorry, Terrorist was the band.
Oh yes,
Terrorizer. Terrorizer is a magazine that reviewed us, and also a grind band in the UK. Terrorist was the name of the band. They were more
they were almost
like
black metal-ish.
They were more black thrash, which that's a different genre altogether now, and that's awesome.
And you had like the West Coast thrash scene was more influenced by like the heavy metal, the new wave of British heavy metal aspect of it. The East
Coast got more of the crossover,
crossover punk and just hardcore punk scene.
Yeah, just because of the New York hardcore
exactly,
punk, and that's like kind of who stuck together with the thrash bands.
Yep, and then the like Texas in the middle of the country kind of got a little bit of both. So it was and it's again, it's same thing with like hip hop. You had like the West Coast hip hop that was like kind of like big sounds and a lot of like a lot of synth driven.
And Arizona kind of got a little bit of everything.
Yeah. And then the East Coast hip hop sound was like more lo-fi, almost like Wu-Tang Clan. It was very like subdued. And then like like Texas, it was like you had like Ghetto Boys and stuff, and it was like kind of like a combination of both.
Yeah.
And it was just, that's kind of like, I guess, just in general what happens. The crossing of cultures and different influences and all that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I don't know. It's just, it was when it was big, it was great, and it's a great genre. It's fast, it's aggressive, it's it's angry.
Yeah.
It really, and it's like you said, it's the purest form of heavy metal. Like there's no frills.
It's almost
in your face.
The way that you could kind of describe like the thrash metal cycle is similar to that of It and the Town of Derry, where every 30 years it emerges,
Yeah.
it wreaks havoc on everything, and then it slumbers for 30 more years.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
we'll see another resurgence of thrash metal probably in the next like 5 to 10 years again.
And then we'll be those old timers just saying, yeah, I saw these guys.
Yeah, I saw Evil back then, and I almost got my lung punctured.
But it was a great time, and I'm glad that we were part of this.
Yes.
I'm glad that we got to experience this weird part of the culture.
Yeah.
The one thing that we didn't get to do was tour, but
Yeah.
I think if we didn't, we kept trying to do a tour with Bomb Scare, and it was specifically Bomb Scare, and I feel like we should have talked to other bands to see who else was interested.
Yeah.
And maybe we would have been able to do something instead of just trying to do it with the same band.
Yeah.
But it just, for whatever reason, the timing was never right.
Yeah.
But I think while we still got a breath in our body, we'll like that. If we do want to like revisit and try to find a way, I think we could do it.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2026, it will be 10 years from the Zamboni album.
Yeah.
So maybe, and we do have some demo tracks lying around of stuff that never that never got fully recorded. So maybe we'll like release something in that time.
Yep.
Of course, not on the Zamboni banner, but we'll do it on the Nuclear Hatred and get like all the right stuff in motion. But it would be interesting to do that after all those years.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sound just consisted of distorted guitars and like overdriven, sometimes distorted bass playing.
Mm-hmm.
The mix was never quite right, but it wasn't supposed to be.
Right.
The drums were, you always had two kick drums and always two like bass drums just to make it as thunderous as possible. The bigger the kit, the better.
Yeah.
And even though like the typical thrash drumming was not too complicated,
usually it was like punk, like just sped up punk drumming.
Yeah, but the bigger the kit, the bigger the kit.
Yep.
And you had a singer who was just yelling as as aggressively as they could into the microphone.
Yep.
Of all kind of like ridiculous lyrics, and the guitars were like as fast as humanly possible. As the more distorted that they could get, the better.
Yep.
Marshall amps were the
classic,
were the flavor of the period.
Yep.
Like the louder that it could be, the better that it was essentially.
Yep.
The louder and faster you got, the better that the more over you were basically.
And I remember everyone had like the metal muff pedal.
Yeah.
That was like the sound, like the scoop mids, like, high bass, high treble, and scoop mids.
Yeah.
Like it was just, and it was like this crunchy guitar sound.
Yeah.
Like, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha, like crunchy, like where like, and when they were like, you would palm mute the string, so it would be like just like like it was just
and a bass player would this is largely credited to Dee Dee Verning of Overkill, of just plugging and or Dan Lilker from Nuclear Assault. Yep. But it's mostly credited with coming out of the East Coast, the thrash metal bass sound, which was just plugging your bass into a Boss distortion pedal.
Yep.
For a Boss guitar distortion pedal, I forget the name of the pedal, but it's the orange one. I think it's the DS1 distortion pedal, and that's it.
Yep.
You just get this like crazy clanking noise.
Yep.
Which I always called it the bonk, but it was but like it's more known as the clank, and it's just unbelievably heavy. Also, another one of the heaviest bands that ever came out. Probably the heaviest of all the thrash metal bands that was closer to death metal was Demolition Hammer.
Oh, yeah.
And in more recent times, you've seen a lot of those bands got back together, and that was one of the best parts of the new wave of like thrash metal was seeing all of those bands get back together and put out new albums, and they were freaking fantastic.
Morbid Saint, I remember seeing them.
That was a great.
What was that? Europa.
Europa.
Yeah,
that
crazy.
was an excellent show.
Yeah.
Somebody went through a glass table.
Oh yeah,
next to me. That was, and
I remember that.
And they got right back up, and they just kept doing their thing.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, cool.
Crazy violence that like you just didn't care.
Was that me? I think that was me.
No, I don't think so.
I saw some guy next to me.
Yeah.
That's what it was. I saw someone next to me, and I was like, okay, well, that's broken. And they were like, they got up and like as if nothing happened, and then like I took a second look, and it was like the glass was shattered on the floor.
Yeah, and like there was like everyone had their beer on the table, and it was just like spilled all over the place.
Yeah,
like,
nobody gave a shit.
Yeah, it was great. It was just you couldn't beat the feeling.
Yeah. It was kind of weird because it was like officially done once Demolition Hammer finally got together and Condition Critical opened for them.
Yeah.
And
the Condition Critical was Demolition Hammer Jr., so it was really it came full circle.
Yeah. The only thing missing was Maury Povich.
Yeah. Oh.
But this has been our 100th episode, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to all 100 of our stupid episodes.
Yes.
Hopefully our audio has gotten better along the way. We will be. I've got to
have 100 more too.
Yep. I've got to get a new interface and we'll fix things up. But you guys, it's been such a pleasure to do 100 of these damn things with like.
Yeah.
Whether or not you give a shit about anything that we have to say, it exists.
Yep.
And
we appreciate everybody that has listened to us and commented and shown us weird muscle men pictures and but it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I know we bury you guys on this show a lot, but like it all comes from a place of love, believe it or not. That's just us in gimmick.
Yeah,
this is us as the people that actually are doing the show and not the characters that we've created for it. You guys have been awesome, and even though we don't get a whole lot of listeners, it's just great to just keep doing this every week.
Yeah.
And we hope that you like it.
Yep.
I hope you learned something today, and if you didn't, well, too bad. But if you used to be into thrash, if you used to play thrash, or like if like whoever your favorite band is, favorite album, whatever it is, just let us know in like any comment or whatever it is that you want to do. And if you have any questions, just leave them as a comment, or just like send it to whydoesthisexistshow@gmail.com. Or if you're a member of our Discord server, just ask us a question, or like tell us who your favorite bands were and everything. And if you're in a band, then like send us your stuff, and maybe we'll get you on the show to just talk about something.
Yeah, it'd be great.
But, it's been a pleasure, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
I'm not Mr. Toad, but it has been a wild ride. But this has been Why Does This Exist? I've been Chris.
And I've been Rob.
And remember, question everything.
See ya.